So, who here is ready for a heaping scoop of sweetened misery? You think I'm not aware of you humans having a sweet tooth for the suffering of others? Another person's torment being something of a remedy for your own misery? Shh! You hear that tune? That song floating in the air? How it draws you in with its promises for the tasty suffering of another, like children being drawn to the promises of a delicious treat. The musical misery of torment, my friends, with different flavors. 'Tis evil, I hear. The beautiful torture of another flesh puppet for your own sadistic entertainment. There's no shame. You people are sick. So, what flavor should we try today? Oh wait, I'd almost forgot. Father's Day's coming up. I think I have the perfect treat for my sadistic viewers. I think I want to see how far the apple falls from the tree. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Joe. Joe here has a desk job at some insurance company downtown. About to get himself a promotion, by the way. He also lives at 329 Crystal Avenue, a very nice neighborhood, and a beautiful wife named Sheila, who's a month away from giving birth to a baby girl. A decent job, a nice home, and a loving wife who's 4 to 5 weeks shy from giving Joe a beautiful family. If I didn't know better, I'd say Joe here's got it made. The perfect life. So, I wonder why the long face with Joe? Why so sad? Well, the man literally has nothing that's worth a decent story for your entertainment. And that's the problem with Joe. The man who has it all, the perfect hallmark living, and yet he literally has nothing worth talking about. I mean, Joe here, he's not a junkie, he's not a serial killer, not some cannibalistic raping maniac with a red rash on his face. He has no intentions of summoning demonic beings. Hell, even that washed-out one-hit wonder who's drinking himself away is more entertaining than this guy. The guy who spent his entire life on the right track. Be a miracle if he had anything that's worth your attention. But don't worry, my friends. Today's story isn't really about Joe. He only has a small role to play before making a big decision. Something that's recently been on his mind since he heard about his friend Chris passing away. And I think that's what's bothering Joe here. That maybe life is a little too perfect for him. Can't help but feel like he's missing out on something. The life we all yearn for, and yet holds no satisfaction for Joe. Anyways, looks like we have a funeral to attend to. And Joe here is giving the eulogy. Been 2 years since he last talked to Chris. Never knew that Chris was sick. Supposedly his father's going to be there too. Been 25 years since he left. And that has been on Joe's mind too. Christopher Carson was, a complicated guy. First and foremost, he was a musical genius. I mean, he had this ear. Any song he heard, he could play it back on the guitar or a piano within seconds. It was amazing to watch. Watching him when he played rock all the time was quite a sight. If Joe didn't know better, he would say that Chris was a living, breathing piece of major scale composition. His laugh was like a good chorus, a jingle. And sometimes he would brood. Like any genius, Chris was given to severe moods and self-depression that sucked the life out of the room. Joe called these episodes Chris's minor chords. But for all his complexity, there was also something about Chris that was profoundly simple. He loved it when the ice cream truck would drive by. I mean, Chris would hear the truck's music and immediately whistle it back, like the song was somehow his, coming from inside him. That's how Joe will remember Chris, radiating music, licking a giant cone of vanilla from the street. Rest in peace, Chris. Beautiful. That was amazing, Joe. You did good. Chris would have loved it. And his father, Mr. Carson, coming to meet Joe after the service. So proud of him for doing that. Not sure if Joe noticed him, but Mr. Carson was there for the whole thing. It's not only his loss, but your loss too, Joe. And Mr. Carson had to thank Joe for doing that. You did good, Joe. And Mr. Carson thanks you for that. You know, with his mother passing away and Mr. Carson, well, being Mr. Carson, that meant a lot, Joe. You did so much for Chris today. It's been a while since Mr. Carson last saw JoJo. And that's when Mr. Carson decided to offer to go somewhere and grab a drink. Catch up on old times. To Chris. To Chrissy. Let's be honest. There's mixed feelings going on here. Like an inner conflict in being in this bar with Chris's father. It's like Joe doesn't want to be here, and yet here he is, drinking cheap beer with a deadbeat father. Not sure if you know, but the story with Mr. Carson is that he left Chris and his mother 25 years ago. According to Chris, nobody knew why he left. There was no argument, nothing out of the ordinary. Just one day, Mr. Carson up and left, and was never seen or heard from again. Until now. Joe should be keeping his space from this man. He wants to, but instead he's being drawn towards Mr. Carson because of these inner feelings he's been struggling with. So, his wife, Sheila, she's now pregnant. That's right, little Sheila. Mr. Carson found it funny how time flies by so fast. Seemed like yesterday she was this bright little girl, and now here she is, with the bread in the oven. Yeah, how time flies by so fast. Joe feeling the awkwardness, and Joe kicking back another shot. That's when Joe decided to cut the small talk and share what's been on his mind. Joe had always wondered, well, no, that's not accurate. Recently, since Sheila got pregnant, Joe's been wondering, why did Mr. Carson leave? How quickly Mr. Carson's cheerful demeanor changed when hearing that question. Not that he's here to demonize Mr. Carson or anything, it's just that Joe has been considering doing the same thing, leaving. It's like what Mr. Carson just said, how time flies by so fast, and it feels like Joe never got a chance to fully experience it. Now with the child along the way, Joe can't help but feel like life never waited for him. And when he heard that Mr. Carson was coming to his son's funeral, he couldn't help but wonder, how was it possible? How did you do it, Mr. Carson? How were you able to make something like that possible? Mr. Carson, both disgusted and yet understandable to Joe's questions, trying to reason with Joe, trying to tell him that what he did was something that happened a long time ago, when he was young and stupid. It was different. But Mr. Carson had a choice. He had a wife and a 7-year-old child, and he just took off. Yeah, Mr. Carson did take off, and you want to know where he took off to? Want to know what possibility gets you? When Mr. Carson left, he went in the woods to live with a bunch of wannabe flower children, artists, musicians, self-described visionaries, and how they all smoked dope and fucked like barn animals. Yeah, sounds amazing, Joe, but it's not the real. Then days of wondering about the life that waits after setting foot out the front door and never coming back. I guess Mr. Carson's taste of freedom isn't what Joe expected to hear. Or maybe Joe, our Boy Scout, just couldn't handle his liquor. So, you want to know why Mr. Carson left. 7 years of fatherhood, Joe. Mr. Carson felt like the being a father was a fucking trap. It was like every day Mr. Carson would come home from his shift and hear Chris screaming. God, how that noise made him want to shoot out his fucking brains. So much changed when Chris came into the picture. Then it got worse when he started with the music. At 6, Chris had so much talent. More music in his pinky than Mr. Carson's entire life. All them big ideas, everything that Mr. Carson wanted to do. It felt like he had to put them all on hold when taking care of Chris and his mother. It was like Mr. Carson was being individually erased by Chris. It felt like Chris had taken everything away, sucking the joy out of life. So, a month after Christmas, when hearing Chris playing that guitar he and his mother got him, that's when Mr. Carson decided to bail. Just like that. He fucking bailed. Since then, he never forgot Chris's face when he left. Even though he said goodbye, Chris must have thought that his father was coming back. Want to know what's funny? After all the drugs and fucking, it didn't take long before Mr. Carson realized that the other stuff out in the world was a trap. The world out there is nothing but a bunch of locked doors. It didn't take long before Mr. Carson finally realized that being a father was his way out. And he fucking blew it. He never had the courage to face Chris and beg for forgiveness. The ghost of your Christmas future, Joe. Kind enough to drive you home because of how you can't handle your liquor. Chris was sick. He was dying, and Mr. Carson never knew about it. If Mr. Carson could only wish for one thing right now, just one thing, if he could only hug his boy one more time and tell him it's going to be okay. He never got to hold his son when he was sick because he was too much of a fucking coward. And Joe, watching Mr. Carson shedding in tears, with what's been on his mind and not expecting this, that was when Joe was suddenly struck with a random and crazy idea. Maybe he can help. Mr. Carson can get the chance to hold his son one last time. As I said, my friends, this story isn't about Joe, nor that coward Mr. Carson. No, our story is about Chris, who looks like he's been having tons of fun. Doubt you even noticed, but while you were wasting your time listening to Joe and Mr. Carson discuss the ideas of feeling trapped and making their escape, Chris has been exploring all sorts of flavors of suffering for your morbid entertainment. Want to know what makes Chris sing? What makes him itch? What makes him tickle? Some of you want to crack open that skull and see what's on that fleshy mind of his. Doubt you've been hearing him, but Chrissy here has been singing everyone's favorite tune. Chris in that insufferable whining noise he likes to make. And you're probably wondering what's happening to Chris. You're wondering if he went where all the dogs go when they die. No, don't worry, my friends. Chris isn't in hell. Everywhere is hell. Chris is in the sweet place, where all the boys and girls go to rot their teeth away. And Chris being welcomed by a monster from the shadows, its flesh melting like ice cream, the scent of chocolate in the air, sweetness and fear. You can call him Rick, Chris's new friend, welcoming him to his new home now, a wonderland where he can play all the music he wants. You like music, right, Chris? Rick's been working on a special tune for his new friend, and he would love for him to hear it. Goodbye, Chrissy. Adios, kid. This is your fault. You're gonna be alone forever, champ. Peace, brother. Bye. Goodbye. Bye-bye. 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 How do you like the tune, Chris? How do you like Rick's special song? He wrote it for you. How would you like to hear it for the next 1,000 years? Look at him. Look how peaceful he looks. It's okay, Mr. Carson. It's okay to say that Chris is in a good place right now. We all know the truth, and how you're too much of a coward to accept it. You know, I'm impressed. Never imagined that Joe would have thought of taking Mr. Carson to Chris's burial site and letting him hold his dead son one last time. I guess he's not all that boring, watching Mr. Carson holding his dead son. Pretty soon, Joe's going to have an important decision to make. So watch. Watch as Mr. Carson holds Chris tight, holding his son one last time and telling him that it's all going to be okay. A father lying to his son, holding him tight and not letting go. So what do you think? You think Joe will run off and try taking control of his life, or endure the suffering hell of feeling trapped as time flies by? Fathers, daddies, there's always the opportunity to escape the miserable hell of feeling trapped and enjoy your freedom. And guess what? You don't even have to worry about the consequences. Don't worry. It's your child who's suffering that miserable hell. Kinda makes me wonder if my father will think of me when I'm burning in hell.